Have you ever asked yourself why there are women alone? No boyfriend, no partner, not even appearing to be searching for one. The reason isn't loneliness, lack of choice, or heartbreak. It's in something more awkward, more disturbing, something that disassembles everything. We learned about a woman's place because when a woman decides to be by herself, she's not losing herself, she's discovering herself. And that type of self-discovery isn't accompanied by applause, likes, or a buddy. It is accompanied by silence, strength, and a sort of freedom. Most folks still can't figure no. She's not lonely. She's choosy. She's not cold. She just got weary of burning for folks who never even wish to feel the heat. There's something deeply threatening in a woman who doesn't require a relationship in order to be whole, because that destroys the logic of control, undermines the myth of emotional dependency, and shows a raw truth. Most men don't know what to do with a woman who doesn't require saving, and most women are still discovering how to know themselves. In that quiet but deafening mirror of power, Carl Jung once stated that everything we reject in ourselves becomes part of our shadow, and many of these single women are in fact a reflection of the collective shadow they are, what many wish to become, but few have the guts to embody. They don't cry out for love, they whisper their decisions, they don't place themselves on show to gain attention, they pull back to save themselves. They're less concerned with seducing princes and more with their own tranquility. And that makes others uneasy, because whilst the world demands haste to be with someone, these women have learned the strength of being with themselves. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not lost. She's working on a different level, a level where nothing is begged for, it's chosen, where approval isn't required, presence is sufficient. And perhaps that's why she provokes so much criticism, so much judgment, so many attempts to label or explain her. But what many do not yet seem to get is that behind her seeming absence is a presence that fills, that transcends, that disrupts the emotional status quo. She doesn't seek just any sort of love. She seeks something that does not diminish her, and until that comes along, she stands firm. You don't understand, yet perhaps you assume it's exaggeration, pride, or emotional hurt in disguise. But way down, deep down, there's a question inside you, a quiet one that throbs even when you try to block it out. What if that unspoken path is the only one that will get you to the most significant type of love? The one that begins with you. The silence that shrouds a woman who lives alone is not emptiness, it's a sanctuary. And those who don't know the worth of that space tend to call her cold, distant, or even arrogant. But what few recognize is the fact that she didn't create that fortress to keep the world out. She created it to not lose herself. Carl Jung once said that everything we don't confront in ourselves, we tend to project on others, and perhaps that is the reason so many women still confuse solitude with lack, when in fact it can be the rich soil of self-discovery, while everybody else seeks to fill themselves up via outer connections. This woman directed her vision inward, and there in the expanse of her own unconscious she confronted the ghosts she evaded for years, childhood hurts unspoken, abandonments, attachments masquerading as love. Her choice to be alone didn't stem from a fresh wound, but from a healed scar she didn't lose. Belief in love, she simply lost, accepting what everyone else referred to as love when it only left her feeling smaller. This woman knows chaos. She's been loved until she lost herself. She's given too much. She's begged for crumbs that never had any business being placed in front of her to start with, but at some point she woke up, and that awakening wasn't abrupt. It was a series of disappointments that ceased to pain and began to teach. What you see now isn't coldness, it's emotional maturity, and maturity is frightening because it requires presence, depth, and truth. She does not want any company. She desires reciprocity. She is no longer attracted to promises but to actual presence. So perhaps that is why she appears unreachable to a lot of people, because she does not want to be saved. She wants to be seen, and that requires more than charm or sweet words. It requires courage to descend the depths where few are willing to venture. And that's where a lot of people give up, not because she's challenging, but because she's complete. And when a woman is complete, she awakens to extremes in the world, and admiration from those who are also pursuing that completeness. Fear from those who remain in halves, hoping for someone else to make them whole. She doesn't want to make anyone whole. She wants to spill over with someone who's found themselves. Until then, she stays alone, not by fate's capricious will, but out of loyalty to her own soul. This woman is not hiding. She's guarding herself. There's a wide difference between isolating and keeping oneself safe, but the world doesn't readily embrace a woman such as this. A world still preaching happily ever after exists only in twos. A world that mistrusts those without a mate as thought that was failure. Carl Jung wrote that where convention reigns, there is little space for authenticity, and this woman is not convention lived. She lives by definition. She hears things such as, "You're too choosy, you must be more open, nobody's perfect." And she smiles a calm, steady, near ironic smile, because she knows what many say is picky is really the bare minimum, the minimum it took her decades to discover she deserves. She's not seeking perfection. She's seeking someone mature enough to love without annihilating. Someone who's done the inner work she's already overcome. And let's be real, that's not something you see on just any street corner. The discomfort she causes isn't in what she says, it's in what she represents. She's living proof that it's possible to be happy without depending on anyone else, and that tears masks off men who feed on female insecurity feel threatened. Women still trapped in the need for approval feel judged, but she isn't here to confront anyone, she's just being. And the authenticity of someone who has freed herself is enough a cruel reflection to those who are still living in bondage. This woman, she isn't rushing. She doesn't have to make things move in order to appease anyone. She honors her own speed. And because of that, she stirs a quiet outrage in a culture that desires everything. Immediately, she desires depth. Where the world is racing against distractions, she desires presence. Where the world only provides shallow availability, she yearns for soul-level connection while everyone else is attempting to look cool on the next Instagram story. And when she says no, it's not agami. It's truth. When she walks away, it's not drama, it's self-defense. When she decides to stay home, rather than going out with someone empty, it's not arrogance. It's clarity, and that clarity gained through pain. And surrender is her greatest revolution, because she doesn't live to please, she lives to be. And that simple act being is what makes her so harmful to the system. Perhaps what alarms people most about this woman isn't her aloneness, it's the calm she's discovered within herself. Carl Jung instructed that those who search outward dream, but those who search inward awaken, and it was just that inner quest that she embarked upon. It wasn't a pleasant process of peeling away masks, confronting the specters of emotional dependency, and reconstructing herself fragment by fragment. She no longer identifies herself through the eyes of people. She views herself in her own eyes, and that makes all the difference. How often have you questioned whether being alone is failure or liberation? How often have you had to explain yourself for not having somebody with you? This woman has felt the same way. She used to believe there was something broken with her for being by herself in a world where couples are put on pedestals, even unhappy ones. But one day she understood it's preferable to be alone than to be made invisible in our relationship. And that day she made an agreement with herself. Never again would she settle for less than what she truly deserves. Her path is not a straight line. There are days of uncertainty, moments of nostalgia, nights of deep silence. But there's also a strength that increases with each decision taken in awareness. She learned that true love doesn't cage, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she desires is the type that freestands, adds supports, without asphyxiating. And until that love comes, she decides to continue developing on her own terms, not pridefully, but out of integrity. This Woman embodies Jung's individuation alive. She dissolved, confronted, her shadow delved into the unconscious and came back more integrated than ever. And now that she knows herself, she won't be half of something anymore. She doesn't want someone to finish her she wishes. Someone to understand that awareness that's daunting because it calls for emotional accountability. And tragically, few are willing to love responsibly. Most continue loving in absence of lack, in possession out of fear. And if she walks alone today, it's because every step rings with learning. Every no she gives is a show of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love need never be begged, for she no longer has to prove anything to anyone, and that knowledge forged from the innermost part of her being changes all that surrounds her, because a woman who has found herself again becomes dangerous. Not due to her weapons, but due to her conviction. The woman who lives by herself without a boyfriend is not the same woman who begged to beloved something within her shattered. And it was exactly that shattering which liberated her, because sometimes, only in falling apart does the soul discover its new create. Carl Jung used to say that the tree that grows to heaven would also have roots that stretch down to hell. And that's precisely what she went through. She descended into the hell of her own narrative, overcame ancestral terror, inherited suffering, traumas that were not her own, but those of all the women who had lived before her. She shattered patterns. She said no to relationships that read from the same poisonous script. She discovered that it wasn't the work to cure anyone, save anyone, or settle for crumbs, because she was afraid of being alone. And when she refused to settle for less, the world did everything it could to make her believe she was wrong. But she held her ground first, with doubt, then with knowledge, and finally with invulnerability, because a person who has lived in their own darkness no longer dreads absences. She comes to sustain herself, on silence, to heat herself with her own presence. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer lets herself be invaded. There's a world of difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come in truth, not with rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's seen enough to tell the difference between presence and performance. Her intuition has become sharp. Her energy is a filter. She can sense from afar what lacks depth, and she doesn't hesitate to walk away. Her transformation isn't superficial, it's archetypal. She's connected to an old memory, a memory that women weren't born to serve, but to express, not to be shaped, but to overflow. And in reaching that memory, something woke up inside her, a wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, although alone, is not at all lost. She's in communication with something bigger, with her own fate, and know how hard they try to label her cold, hard, distant. Nothing holds, because she no longer lives to fit in. She lives to expand. She no longer struggles for attention. She shines presence. She's no longer waiting to be selected. She does. The choosing, and that turnabout of logic perplexes those who attempt to control the feminine, but she's no longer there. She's already passed through the door, and on the other side, she found that the true relationship starts only after you've loved yourself enough that you don't need anyone. There's something holy about the way she walks through the world. She doesn't need applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet, and it's in that silence that her truest strength lives. Carl Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself again and again, has become the author of a destiny that few can understand, but many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with promises or convince anyone that she is worthy of love. She doesn't plead for space in anyone's life, because she's learned that being present should never be pleaded for, it should be invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from authenticity, she simply says no. She doesn't respond in anger or bitterness. She walks away with the dignity of someone who's been lost too many times to let the same hurt occur again. What few people get is that this woman still yearns for love. She still desires to be held, touched, picked, but she desires it without losing herself, because she's wasted too much time attempting to fit into molds too small for the soul she wears. Now she only gives herself where there's space to be whole. And that takes a level of maturity that extends far beyond romance. It takes awareness. It takes having confronted one's own shadow and still opting to love. She's not searching for fairy tales. She's searching for a soul, alliance, a relationship where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow. Side by side without fading, their colors muffling their pain or shrinking their dreams. And if that's too much for some, so be it, because she'd rather wait than subsist on emotional scraps. And to many that sounds like arrogance, but it's actually just self-love in its most essential form. We are seeing a new archetype of woman. A woman who has walked away from the shallow and plunged into the depths, who felt weary of being just wanted and decided to be respected, who decided to live alone, not because she lost hope on love, but because she came to realize that true love never requires self-sacrifice. And when a woman comes to know that her entire universe starts turning around, she doesn't have to shout to be heard. Her presence is spoken before words. Wherever she goes, the energy shifts, as though something in the room realigns quietly but unmistakably. This isn't mysticism. It's energy. It's the weight of someone who is already engaged, the most brutal inner battles, and decided to come back in peace. Not because she overcame all her fears, but because she learned how to live with them without being defeated. Carl Jung would argue that she found wholeness not through the elimination of opposites, but through their integration. This woman doesn't turn away from love. She's just learned not to succumb to unbalanced relationships where one must dim so the other can shine. She longs to love, but inner love where her essence doesn't need to be edited, a love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm, because she realized that those who only love the pretty parts haven't yet learned what love truly is, and those who demand constant sweetness still don't understand the beauty of bitterness, so necessary for growth, that she's too complete to accept halves, too liberated to settle for prisons, deceptive as care, too feeling to tolerate superficial bonds, and be equally strong enough to continue picking this road even when it aches, even when it's solitary, even when it's misunderstood. That is the path of an enlightened soul, sacrificing immediate validation for richer truth deeper within the world. Is afraid of women like her, women who don't require, women who don't bow, women who won't be shaped, because they challenge unseen structures, ask new questions, and rupture old patterns, and destroy silent emotional agreements that once insisted that a woman only has value if she's with someone. And when she shatters those agreements, when she reclaims her own story, she empowers others, and that to the system is perilously revolutionary. So she keeps on, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with a chest out high, but always with her feet planted firmly on the earth, because now she knows she is not alone, she's with herself. And after all she's been through, that is more than sufficient. The love that follows, that will not be salvation, it will be celebration. It will not come to fill her, it will come to overflow. When a woman decides to walk alone, the world comes running to tell her she's mistaken, but inside she senses something aligning in her. It's not pride or defiance, it's an uncommon type of wisdom that only comes into being in silence. The same wisdom Jung named individuation, the act of being the whole person you are, without pretenses, without sacrifice. And when that occurs, nothing outside of her is more influential than the truth that beats within her chest. The truth doesn't have to yell, it can manifest in the manner she quietly closes a door, without bitterness, in the way she shrinks when the world is no longer nourishing for her, as she smiles in bliss, even with no one around her, because she found that solitude is not a punishment, it's an oath of commitment to her own soul. And the soul of an awakened woman does not bow down, does not fade, does Not beg, it just is. And that is all that is needed. The world will continue trying to inform her she's lacking something. It will continue presenting distractions, plastic princes, love made for show. But she's already seen behind the curtain. She's already known. It's not about finding someone, it's about never losing yourself again. And when that knowledge blooms, everything shifts. Desire becomes discernment, lack becomes choice, waiting becomes a way. And what once hurt now teaches, what once bound now sets free. You can feel it deep inside, that stirring, that spark maybe. It's a memory, an old wound, a nostalgia that never made sense. Maybe it's the image of a woman you once knew or the woman you've become in. Either case, something within you is asking to be seen more. Clearly something that no longer fits in old molds, something that if you let it could completely transform how you relate to love, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than just someone who doesn't fit the mold. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it's possible to rebuild without rushing, without fear, and without having to prove anything to anyone. She doesn't walk ahead of anyone, but she doesn't follow either. She carves her own path, unique, enviable, and along that journey, she lights little fires for others who are waking up too. If something inside you was touched by this story, maybe it's because deep down, you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. Love that thrives on silence, presence, and truth. A love that isn't negotiable, begged for, or masqueraded. And if that love isn't arriving as yet, perhaps it's because you first had to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves. And if this message arrived at exactly the right moment, or stirred someone you had forgotten was living within you, then I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share this video with other women who must remember their own strength. Like it, comment, and subscribe to this channel, not out of whim, but out of choice. Because when something speaks to the soul, the least we can do is allow it to continue resonating within us and through us.